What's up, vintage moto fans? On today's episode of Wheelhouse Garage, we are going to be diving into the thrilling history of the California Desert Sled, one of my favorite subjects ever. It has been well over 100 degrees here all week, so riding these things is out of the question, and working on them doesn't really sound like much fun either. So we are going to grab a nice cold beer and have a good old-fashioned chat. This is a nice North Coast scrimshaw. Real refreshing on a day like today. Okay, now before we get started, let me throw this out to you. I obviously did not live through the Desert Sled era. And you may be watching this show and maybe you did live through that era. So I just want to encourage you to hop in the comments, tell your story, tell us what you know. There's no way I'm going to be able to cover all the significant events of this, the history of this incredible sport and this phenomenon. So please share what you know. Love to hear it. All right, so the story of the California Desert Sled goes back over 100 years to the early 1920s, when the pioneers of the motorcycle world were ready to take it to the next level. They took road bikes, we're talking early American makes here, like Harley Davidson and Indian, and they started modifying them to be able to take them in the dirt. They threw knobby tires on, they did whatever they could to the suspension, ditched the headlights, taillights, and they started hitting the trail on these giant heavy machines. It must have been an absolutely crazy time, but so exciting as well. Legend also has it that in 1921, the first kind of Big Bear race happened between two guys who wanted to see who could make it to Big Bear Lake the fastest. One guy went on the road, one guy went off-road to some trail he made up. And it was early January, so there was snow blocking the road actually, and somehow the other guy made it. And that was kind of the beginning of what would spark the biggest motorcycle race in the world in years to come. Fast forward 100 years, and we do still have a small group of guys that are perpetuating the very early American Desert Sled. They're taking Harley JDs and early Indians and building them for off-road use, and they're actually racing them. It's incredibly cool. Now, it's my understanding that in these early days, 2030s and maybe even the 40s, you didn't see that many British manufacturers down in the desert. Now, that would change big time within the next decade. Let's get into that. As we enter the 1950s, the term desert sled is coined, it's used, and it really embodies the spirit of adventure and innovation. And here's where the British manufacturers like Triumph, BSA, Norton, and Matchless come in, and with the help of the California dealers like Bud Eakins, they identify that, hey, here's a good market. We should be making production bikes for off-road. So you get things like the Triumph TR6, the Matchless G80 CS, the Norton Nomad in the late 50s, and people are racing BSA Gold Stars too. Also in the 50s, you got races like the Greenhorn Enduro and the Catalina Grand Prix, where these guys are riding desert sleds on these incredible off-road courses and going faster than you might think. As we roll from the 50s to the 60s, we've got some big changes going on with the bikes. In the 50s, it was all pre-unit construction, meaning that the motor and the gearbox are two separate entities. But as we roll into about 1963 for most manufacturers, they've married the motor and the gearbox, so they share a bottom case. The bikes are getting a little bit lighter. There's some frame changes from some manufacturers. It's at this point that Steve McQueen is embedded in the culture, and he's drawing a whole new crowd. And we've got a lot more people building and buying off-road desert sleds and racing them in the desert.
This awesome old scan from Ted's Triumphs is a great representation of how most of the sleds were modified in the 60s. Just to point out a few key elements, you've got high straight-through pipes, heavy-duty skid plate, layover sprocket for better torque, knobby tires, stainless steel custom-modified front fender, bait seat, and then more subtle stuff like the subframe was bent up a little bit to allow for more travel in the rear. A lot of times the front forks were raked out a little bit more. Larger air filters with custom housings like this ultra rare Q air filter were also a necessity for keeping out the dust kicked up during these extreme desert races.
As the 60s wind down, we have a real interesting period. The two-stroke revolution is happening. You've got bikes like the Greaves Challenger and the early Husky 400s coming in, and these bikes are literally like 100 pounds lighter, way better suspension, and they're as faster, in some cases faster than these big heavy four-strokes. But Triumph and BSA are still coming out with cool bikes like the BSA Hornet. The Triumph TR6C is a really competitive competitive bike. And you've also got the Norton P11, which is just legendary. And so there's this brief history where these 2-strokes and 4-strokes are kind of battling it out in the California desert. And that's another amazing time in the sport. But as the 70s come on to the scene, the 2-strokes have really punched the heavy 4-stroke market in the gut, and the British manufacturers start to struggle. Bad decisions are made, oil and frame Triumphs and BSAs come out, and the British manufacturers, they start to wither away and die, and the Desert Sled kind of dies with it. Thankfully, the 2-strokes kind of carry the torch and put us into a different era of off-road racing that thankfully still exists today. But the Desert Sled kind of dies there in the early 70s, at least in the traditional sense. Today, these bikes are immortalized by people like me and you who just love these things, and maybe we found them and revived them, or we found them and we're preserving them, but we're carrying on the history of these incredible revolutionary machines, and it is so fun to do. I hope that if you're watching this and you've watched the videos on this channel and you're considering about getting involved with vintage motorcycles, specifically off-road bikes, that you make that leap and do it. It's incredibly fun. And sometimes it's frustrating because these bikes require a lot of work, but it's just an incredible thing to be a part of if you're interested in such things, and I hope this video helps you get into it. At this point, my camera is yelling at me that it's overheating, and it's time to wrap up this video, but hopefully this provided some cool insights for you. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments. If there's any part of this video that you'd like to know more information about, let me know that too, because I could do a future episode on that. All right, folks, thank you so much for watching, liking, subscribing, and buying t-shirts. They're available on the website. I'll put a link to it. Other than that, I'll see you next Saturday with a whole new video. Cheers!
Thanks so much for watching that video. Be sure to tune in every Saturday morning for more fun and adventures. There's over 30 motorcycles to check out on the Bike and a Beer series, and we now have t-shirts available for sale. Follow along for some epic adventures in the High Sierra on all types of rare and incredible motorcycles. There's a workshop element to this channel too, as I do a lot of my own mechanical work. I'll share all the tips and tricks I've learned, show you all the tools I use to get it done, and there'll be some exciting new products to promote as well. So join in every Saturday morning, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. Thanks.